Hey folks, and welcome to another OctoChats with myself, Sarah Lean. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, I've actually got a new guest, and I'm joined by Bob. Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Yeah, it's Friday, so it's a good day.
That's right. Well, it's your Friday afternoon. It's my Friday morning.
Very, very true. Now,
Yeah.
Bob, I'm sure there's a bunch of regulars who know who you are because you've been involved in a lot of our webinars on the channel. But for those that don't know you, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, certainly. Absolutely. My name is Bob Walker, and I am the technical director of our customer success team. I've been with Octopus Deploy since 2018. I was one of the first US-based employees along with Ryan Russo. That was pretty cool. I always love to throw that in there whenever I can. And before working at Octopus Deploy, I was a user of Octopus Deploy. So I've been a big fan, and I'm just really happy I get a chance to work here. So.
Awesome. So you're a fanboy turned employee then, Bob?
Yeah, that's exactly how it turned out. I was like, for my interview process, I'm like, I am going to show them, like, I know Octopus Deploy.
Awesome. Well, it's obviously worked out for you, so
Yeah.
brilliant. So today we're going to be talking about Octopus news, community news, and then we've got a bunch of industry news that we want to talk about as well. So first up, I just want to give a shout out to a live stream that myself and Derek did earlier in the week with Lior and Jeff from Microsoft. We were talking about the Microsoft hybrid cloud and where that goes and all of the future around what that ultimately means. Now, that was a live stream, but it's on demand if you want to head over to our YouTube channel and search for it, The Future of Hybrid. So I do recommend checking that out and seeing what we talked about, because there was lots of interesting chat over there. Now, the other thing that I do want to shout out to in terms of Octopus news is our upcoming webinar where we're doing a Ask Octopus live, and we've got Ryan and James who will be taking your questions. So if you've got any burning questions about Octopus, how to do something, roadmap features, anything around DevOps, please head on over to octopus.com/events and find out more information, because I know the guys were willing to take your questions. So we definitely want to test them with some questions. So yeah, head on over and be part of that live question and answer with Ryan and James next week as well. So lots of exciting things there. In terms of the community, I do want to give a shout out to Carol, who tweeted about the swag that she received from Octopus. So it's maybe a well-known or little-known fact that we do give out swag if you talk about Octopus, if you blog about Octopus, if you create videos, or sometimes you can get swag from meetups that myself and the team attend as well. So if you want to get some swag, then talk about Octopus and let us know, because we can make that happen for you as well. So, Bob, MS Build or Microsoft Build has been happening this week, and there's tons of news in the kind of arena at the moment, and we could be here all day talking about news, right? But the first one I want to talk about is a .NET one, which is your bit of news. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so .NET MAUI is going into, looks like it's general availability or preview, but it is, I'm actually really excited by this because having that ability to develop using, say, C Sharp and have it supported across all the different devices, it's kind of like the next generation of Xamarin. It was one of those cases of, I wish this was available 5 years ago when I was challenged with it. We wanted to create an application that worked on both Windows and Android at the time. So I was like, oh my gosh, if they had something like that available, then it would have made my job so much easier. We had so many different discussions on the approach we wanted to take because we were all C# developers. And that was the case of, okay, what tooling do we definitely want to use? We're looking into Xamarin. We're looking into just .NET Native. Like, how do we want to do something like that? So I'm really, I can't wait to see where the industry goes with this new batch of tooling. But yeah, I was kind of curious if you had any thoughts on that as well.
I'll be honest, no, because I'm not a .NET developer. Like, I can go in and I can change some settings, like I can change like dates on footers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
From the code that you and the team have created. But yeah, .NET isn't something that I've tried to do. But it's interesting. Is this very different from like .NET 6, or is this just a kind of add-on or addition to it?
It's built on top of .NET 6.
Right.
Yeah, so it's just an additional set of libraries and tools and functionality that enables you to build cross-platform tooling such as that.
Okay.
So like if you wanted to target Windows and Android in our particular case, or Windows, Android, and Mac OS,
Right. Okay.
or iOS. Yeah. And what was really cool when I was reading through it, it was they would also provide the tooling and techniques where you could also make it appear very native to the platform itself. So I think the example that they used was Android likes to render text boxes slightly different than, say, Windows.
Mhm.
And so there's the ability where you can go in and say, hey, if I'm running on an Android, add this additional bit of styling. But you have the same code base all throughout everything else.
Okay.
The only fear I have of that is you end up in a situation where, like, just you look through your code and it's just strewn with if Android, if iOS, if Windows, and it's like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? But hopefully that's just a styling thing. It's not like logic things or anything like
Yeah.
that. So yeah, I'm really curious. I'm really kind of, like I said, I'm really curious to see where it goes from here, because it is one of those really kind of neat features that's out there. It's very similar to, say, like a React Native,
Okay.
or anything along those lines. We have the ability to kind of develop an app once and then have it built and get deployed on any different platform.
Nice. I've definitely seen the community creating lots of content and how-tos and explaining bits and pieces of it. So I'm sure it's already had a lot of hype, but I'm sure it'll get
Yeah.
even more hype now. So yeah, looking forward
Yeah.
to see that. I'm sure you and the team will give us some demo app that I can demo and try and find my way around eventually.
Yep. At some point, I hope. It's on my list of many things to do.
Awesome. Now we're actually also going to be saying goodbye to either loved friend or hated friend, depending on how you feel about it. But next month, IE 11 or Internet Explorer 11 is actually getting retired. So June 15th, 2022 will be the kind of end of support for IE 11. Now I looked back and had a look when actually IE 11 came out, and that was 2013. And I'm feeling old because I do remember it and do having to remember the rollout of it. So, but I think even though it's retiring, I think the caveat to remember is that inside Microsoft Edge, there is backward compatibility for IE 11. So if you've still got some of those legacy and horrible apps kicking around in your environment and you need IE 11, there is backward compatibility support built into Microsoft Edge. So that's one to kind of keep an eye on. And if you haven't already done your plan for getting rid of IE 11, then I think you definitely have to start doing that now, because it's June the 15th that it's going to go end of life.
Long time frenemy goes away.
Yep, I
I
know.
think I fight with that. I fight with IE 11 every time I stand up a new Windows Server VM, because you go in there and you're like, I need to go to this website, download a few things, and you have to go in, you have to add it every like exception to their rules. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yep.
Like, I think the first thing I do is I was like, I'm gonna go download Firefox or something. So I don't have to fight with this anymore.
I know. Actually, it'll be interesting to see what we're doing in terms of the server, if we're going to get Edge on the server. But then I'm always a bit wary of having a browser on a server anyway, which is a completely other conversation. But we'll see what that means. Also, you noticed in the build news that there's some exciting things for the SQL Server, Bob. What does that entail?
There's a lot of new things coming out for SQL 2022. So it's in preview right now. And it's our first, it's the first new version of SQL since 2019. So that's really exciting in and of itself. But for me personally, I'm a big SQL data guy. If you've followed me or you've paid attention to me, you notice I talk a lot about automated database deployments. And then I cut my teeth on the first doing deployments, automated deployments for SQL Server. So learning some of the innards and how all that works. But yeah, so I've always been kind of I always come back to it. Anytime I have to set up a demo, I think my first instinct is .NET and SQL Server. But anyway, sorry, I'm kind of rambling on with something along those lines.
Okay.
For me, some of the things I'm really excited about is some more JSON support. So having the ability, there's JSON constructors now within SQL Server, so you can create basically JSON data using your own data. And I'm kind of curious to see what's going to happen with something like that, because I could see a lot of different use cases on that. Say having the ability to go in and insert into new tables that you want to store your JSON data in, or having the ability to plop out JSON just because like maybe an app is expecting that. But there's also some new other T-SQL functions that I haven't had a chance to play around with because I haven't installed the preview yet, but I'm very intrigued by the greatest and least functionality, where it's different. It's a little bit different than like max or min, where you can have disparate data types. As long as they can be implicitly converted together, they can be compared. Yeah, so like if you had like a number that said 1, 2, 3, and then you had a string that said 4, 5, 6, and then you had another string that said 7, 8, 9, it would pick 7, 8, 9 if you're doing greatest, even though it was a string. It's like, oh, that's pretty interesting, being able to do that. But and then yeah, there's I could go on and on about all the features, and hopefully I don't bore everyone to death with that. I think the only other thing that I kind of added this late in our notes, it was the concept of Azure Link, which if you have any experience with SQL Server, the first time I heard it, I was like, oh, is this another linked server, but it's just pointing to Azure SQL? That's actually not it. It's kind of it's an extension. It looks like it's an extension of the concept of availability groups. So it will send basically replicated data up to Azure SQL for having, say, a read-only version of your data in Azure SQL while you have your read-writes on-premise. So that could be a disaster recovery scenario. It could also be used for, say, some read-only applications you have running. Maybe you have some Power BI up there, or any sort of analytics that you don't need write access. You just need read access to. It's like, but you're also not slamming your on-premise SQL Server with all that heavy data queries and everything like that. So I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I think that would be something that'd be really interesting to do.
Yeah, I think when I read the news, they billed it as the most Azure-enabled SQL Server ever.
Of course they did.
Which is also interestingly the kind of slant that they use for Windows Server 2022. And I know there's a ton of Azure kind of integrations in Windows Server 2022. So I'm guessing there's going to be good synergy there in terms of if you're running on-prem, you run Windows Server 2022, and then you put SQL Server 2022, and then you've got all of the functionality to extend out to Azure to use the different PCs, like you mentioned, and have that hybrid mode, I guess we're going to call it nowadays. But yeah, using the most of what you have on your own data center and then expanding out to Azure to offload or use DR capabilities and stuff like that. So yeah, sounds interesting. But
yeah, that's a really good point. I do think that that's definitely going to be the way of the future, at least for the next 5 years, if not more, of that hybrid sort of world where people are going into the cloud, but they still have a significant investment with all of their hardware on premise, and or they have different varying degrees of company policy, security concerns, whatever the case may be, where it makes sense to keep a certain batch of information on premise. So yeah, absolutely, having that capability. Microsoft isn't a fool. It's like, well, if you're gonna have to go to a cloud, why not Azure? Let's make it super easy.
I know. I suppose the hybrid one, like we talked about actually in that live stream the other week, is making the most of the investments that you still have, the legacy configurations that you have, the legacy knowledge. I don't like the name legacy. I don't know why I keep using it, but all of that on-prem stuff that you have invested in over the years, and then taking advantage of the hybrid and looking at the cloud in the future. Because as much as we would love to migrate to the cloud and get rid of all of our data centers, it's not going to happen within like a weekend. It's a years long project, 5, 10 years potentially to get rid of all of that, if you ever do get rid of it. But
it's funny, we're helping a customer kind of lift and shift their on-premise Octopus Deploy instance up into Azure. And it has been I would say it's taken a lot longer than I was thinking, but it's all of the different conversations they have to have in terms of talking with their infrastructure folks. Making sure that they're not going to see a decrease in performance with their link, like with all their links and everything like that, the link in between their data centers and the cloud. So yeah, it is not a simple thing to do, to just, oh yeah, I can just plop everything up in the cloud. Yeah, no, it is a lot of conversations, a lot of considerations, and eventually it does make a lot of sense, but you get to make sure that this is a strategic investment. That's not something you're just gonna do over the weekend or YOLO it. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I actually noticed something else in the build news talking about migrations and moving. Is there's some new features coming inside Azure Migrate. Now, if anybody's followed me on social media or whatever for the last few years, they'll know this is probably one of my favorite products inside Azure. But one of the cool things that they've announced in preview is the ability to pause your migrations. So before, when you started a migration from your on-prem data center to Azure, you just had to let it run. There was no pausing. You just had to kind of let it go, and it would take however long it was going to take. But now they have the pause mechanism, so you can pause it, and then potentially during business hours, maybe if you don't have the capacity to use all of your internet connection or whatever it needs to be, but you can pause that migration again for whatever reason you need to do it. But that's pretty significant feature, being able to do that and have it still run, because I'm sure probably you've done this as well, Bob, where you've been doing syncing of something from somewhere, paused it, and then it's never restarted and you've had to start from 0% again. So it'll be interesting to see how that works, because that's obviously massively important. If you're syncing your data and your servers up into the cloud and you pause it, you don't want to start again if you've got to like 70%, 80%.
I wonder if it's going to do it like at if they're doing like database, if they do it at a per database thing. So the pause stops after the database finishes uploading. So that's like, okay, we've gotten the like we're pausing at logical stops as opposed to like just cutting it right then and there.
That would be interesting. Definitely, that would send the heart rate up for a few minutes.
Especially when you started it up again. I think that would probably that would really be the nerve-wracking point. It's like, oh man, I hope everything's gonna work.
I suppose that's when you need to have your data checking at the other end once it's done the sync or synced. When it's completed, you have to have all your checks in place. Otherwise, fun times. Talking about the future, you spotted some Kubernetes news and various different things. Now, it's a topic I don't know much about, so I'm hoping you know lots about it, Bob.
It's one of those things that, I'm still very much a newbie person in learning all of that. And when I was reading the announcement, they kind of hit the nail on the head where they said, okay, if you want to move from Windows Server running everything on IaaS or as a Windows service, and now you want to containerize that application, it's more than just containerization. It's going through and like you have to now learn about ingress controllers, nodes, pods, how all of that stuff works, even though the AKS handles a lot of the bits and pieces for you. So what's really kind of neat about it is Microsoft is adding in the tooling and the functionality to make it a little bit easier to get started with AKS. So I think the example I saw looked very akin to right-click deploy, but I was like, that's a little bold to go that far. But having the ability, if you could offload some of that cognitive burden and just trying to containerize your first application, because I think after you kind of do the first batch of applications, you can learn about all those different bits and pieces and how to host things in Azure and everything like that, or AKS or Kubernetes just in general. I definitely, I don't want to sound like a Microsoft fanboy, but I definitely applaud Microsoft for going through and trying to make that experience better, especially for developers, especially for people that are learning something new, because as I would say, for some of the other cloud providers, and I won't mention which ones, it is very much a, well, here's the docs, have fun type of thing, and good luck. But Microsoft's like, okay, we're trying to think about the developer experience. And it seems like it just feels like they're going the extra mile. And I might just not be reading the appropriate announcements, but it is nice to see those extra bits and pieces. So you can onboard more and more people that have been used to just writing ASP.NET website and hosting an IIS for years and years and years, such as myself. I have to learn a new trick all of a sudden. So
I know. I think I've played with containers and Kubernetes on and off for the last few years, and I can cobble something together, but there's definitely a lot to learn in that space. So anything that can help accelerate that learning journey is definitely interesting. Hopefully it's accelerating the learning journey without you skipping the learning, because I've seen products that do that, where it's really easy to fire them up and get them into production environments, and then no one knows how they work, and then no one wants to touch it, and that's how we end up with like 2003 servers still running in 2022.
It was like when I set up my Oracle client on my local developer machine. It's like once I got it working, I was like, I'm not touching this thing. I don't care what updates come in. That was an experience unto itself. But yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And I would say also for people who aren't really, I wouldn't say comfortable running AKS. That's not really necessarily the right term.
hmm
But there's an alternative to AKS, which is ACS, which is the Azure Container Service, which Microsoft's also adding in the ability to make things easier. One of the cool things I saw was making it easier to add an ingress to host a website, host a web API or anything along those lines. Not only that, but also setting up stuff for like certificates and custom domains and all those little things that you don't think about until it's
Yeah.
now it's running and you're like, oh, now how do I get people to this thing I just plopped up there?
Yep. I
So,
know. There's certainly a lot to think about when you go down the container route. I think some people misunderstand that it's easier to do it than maybe running Windows servers or Linux servers like we're used to. But I
mhm.
think the more you dig into containers, at least from my point of view, I think there's a ton of stuff that you have to do to make it run seamlessly. So that's always an interesting learning curve when people realize that it's not just, oh, I can spin up a container and it's all done for me.
Yeah. I have talked to some folks and they are under the mistaken impression that, oh, it's a container. It's just a headless VM. I'm going to treat it like a headless VM. So sometimes we're asking you install tentacles on containers.
Yeah.
I'm like, that kind of breaks the whole principle of how immutable containers. That's very concerning. It's like we want to be able to update containers as they're running. Like, oh no,
Yeah.
that's a scary thought. But yeah, so yeah, it like you said, it is very much it's a mind shift. It's a
Yeah.
I want to say a learning curve, but you just have to change the way that you
Mhm.
kind of view your
Think
application.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, on to some more other news, because I noticed hidden in amongst the news, there was a raft of new Microsoft certifications and different exams being released. Now, I think some of these exams are already out in terms of beta, but it's interesting to see the path that you necessarily have to go on to earn the certification. So, what I noticed is to get the Microsoft certified cybersecurity architect expert, which is a mouthful, you actually need to sit 2 exams. So you need to sit SC100, which is a new beta exam I know lots of people have been sitting. And then you have to sit a prerequisite exam as well. So those are some of the Azure Security Engineer exams or the security for M365 or identity and access ones. So in order to get that certified kind of job, that title, you need to sit 2 exams. So that was an interesting one in terms of that. So it'll be interesting to see how many people earn that one. We also got a new exam in the form of the Power Automate RPA Developer Associate exam, which again is in beta and it's a PL 500 exam. And this is all around being able to automate your time consuming and repetitive tasks inside Power Automate. So you really have to understand the creation process, the design, the development, the troubleshooting, and evaluating all of the solutions. So another interesting one to kind of show your skills and show where you are on that Power Automate journey if you want to obviously sit the exams. Now, another one, MS 220, which is again a mouthful to say, the Microsoft 365 Certified Exchange Online Support Engineer Speciality. This is about looking at Exchange Online within the M365 world. So I think a lot of people will administrator M365 and you might specialize in an area. So this one's showing that you have that knowledge inside the M365 Exchange Online piece as well. We've also got the AZ720, which is the Microsoft Certified Azure Support Engineer for Connectivity Speciality. And this is looking at both networking in Azure and in a hybrid capability. So you have to have that experience both in Azure and to a certain degree off Azure as well. And I think the last one is the DP500 exam, which is Microsoft Certified Azure Enterprise Data Analysis Associate, which is more focusing on your Power BI, your Power Query, your data analysis expressions. Can't speak this morning. So yeah, there's a whole host of exams that have been released in beta, so that means that if you set them right now, you wouldn't get result straight away, and you would have to wait until the beta program finished, which is usually about a month, 2 months time. So yeah, definitely have a go at some of these exams, put them on the radar, start studying, because I know there's a massive debate about whether certifications are something you should add, but I've always benefited from sitting these exams, both from my learning skills and showing off to prospective employers where I have certain skills. So interesting new exams coming out as well. So yeah, hopefully they're useful to you. Now, Bob, I wanted to chat to you about one bit of news that has been quite dominant in the tech industry this week, and that is the kind of buyout or purchasing of VMware by Broadcom, which I think has been announced as confirmed this afternoon or
Oh,
today.
really? Okay, yeah,
And
I
I
haven't.
think,
I didn't see that. I just woke up.
yeah, I think it's pretty much both boards have agreed to sell for, I think it's something like 61, is it million or billion? There was,
Billion.
yeah,
As a B.
there was a B in there, which is interesting because as part of the announcement, they've also said that when Broadcom buy VMware, they're going to take over the VMware name, so they'll no longer necessarily be Broadcom, so everything will be VMware. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about this and what it will change for the tech industry, but interesting news nonetheless. What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, it was interesting because I kind of did a little research about when I saw this because I'm like, Broadcom, because I've heard Broadcom. I mean, I've
Yeah.
seen Broadcom drivers on my. Like, I probably have Broadcom equipment in my laptop right
Yeah.
now. But there's Broadcom Corporation, which is the one that I think that most people are familiar with when you hear the term Broadcom. They're the ones that are the fabless semiconductor company.
Mm.
Sorry, I have Wikipedia pulled up right now. But then there's also Broadcom Incorporated, which is, I think it's the holding company. And so they're the ones that hold like Broadcom Corporation. They're also the ones that do that also looks like they own the semantic enterprise security, and
Yeah.
they own a whole bunch of other things. So it makes sense from that point of view. It's kind of curious that I'm kind of curious to see what name changes. I suspect it's going to be the Broadcom Incorporated. That holding company is going to change to VMware since it's so well known.
Mhm.
I can't imagine a world where Broadcom, the corporation, like the company that makes all the hardware that you know and love, would change their name. So that's just such a known name at this
Yeah,
point.
I know. It's weird because I forgot that Dell used to own VMware. So they
Yeah.
were like a hardware and a software company and all that kind of stuff. And then VMware obviously broke out on their own. And now they're going back to being owned by a hardware company effectively. So
Mhm.
yeah, interesting times. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think it's been confirmed, but it'll be interesting to see like the cultural changes, if there's a whole host of job changes and stuff like that. I noticed on my Twitter feed people were reaching out saying we're hiring if you want to leave VMware, which I thought was a bit early
Yeah.
in the process to be looking for a new job, but I guess maybe some people will. So yeah.
Have you ever been part of a company that was acquired by another company?
Um, yes, but interestingly enough, I'd actually handed in my resignation before that announcement, so I never got to take part in the process of changing the name and stuff. But have you?
Yeah, I have. I don't really want to mention which company, but
Yeah,
yes, I was working for a company and it was acquired by it was one of those significant holding companies. And for us, what it felt like it was a year long, if not 18-month process of they'd come in, they do some analysis, they would look at your tech stack and
yeah,
everything. And kind of during that 18 months, it kind of felt like it was business as usual. They did name brand analysis because they're like, should we change the entire company name to be this, or should we keep this legacy name that everyone knows?
hmm
Yeah, and so yeah, there's naturally that fear of like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen?
yeah,
And it was just more along the lines, I'm just going to kind of wait and see what's going to happen here. And then it was kind of one of those weird things, kind of similar to you. It's like another opportunity came up kind of midway through that whole process, and it's like,
mm.
well, I don't have to see the end of this right now. But it wasn't like I was actively looking because of that.
Yeah,
It was just one of those, oh, but yeah,
yeah,
it is very much a scary thing when the first time it happens because you have that fear of like, oh my gosh, is someone going to come in and it's like It's going to be like Office Space where they're going to interview. It's like, what does it say you do here?
Yep.
Type of scenario.
Yep.
Or is it going to be like, you know, what's going to happen? And so, yeah, I think I learned that for a lot of those major corporations, someone like me who's so low level, they were like, nah, we're not really concerned about what they're doing right now. We were kind of looking at the much bigger picture as to what
Yep.
this company does that we just acquired.
But kind of like what we're talking about in the hybrid world, it doesn't happen overnight. Like, I don't
Yeah.
think there's going to be massive cultural changes like in the next 24 hours or whatever. It's going to, like you say, there'll be analysis going on in the background. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, thank you so much, Bob, for giving up your time. We're at the end of the show, which is the fastest half hour of my entire week. Thank you so much for joining me.
No
I
problem.
appreciate it. And thank you to everybody that's tuned in and watched us this afternoon. So thank you to you. We will be back next month with another OctoChats. But as I say, there's tons of events happening between then and now. So head over to octopus.com/events and check out all the things that are happening between then and then. See you later, folks.
See you later. Have a great one. Thank you.